Every year, the U.S. imports more and more produce, fresh fruits and vegetables from Mexico. And every year, wages have stayed the same for the people that harvest that produce. Sometimes, the last people to touch the fruit bought by U.S. consumers. But after years of long, hot days and stagnant pay, workers left the fields and took to the streets to demand better working conditions and a living wage. The response from the government was swift and fierce. This was the first time in over a decade a strike like this has happened in Mexico. In this episode of Fault Lines, we went to meet the people picking so much of the food we eat in the United States and asked what is keeping them at the bottom of our food system. We're about an hour away from the heart of where farm workers have started to protest against their conditions, and we're already coming up on a checkpoint. This could be an early sign that the movement's starting to spread. Thousands of farm workers had been striking for over a week. With the fields empty and the main highway blocked off, they had brought production to a halt at the peak of harvest in one of Mexico's main agricultural areas, the Valley of San Quintin. They're asking drivers for donations to support the cause, because while these people are striking, they're not getting paid. When they are paid, workers here make an average of 120 to 130 pesos a day, or $8 to $9.
El encargado dice que si queremos y si no, la puerta está bien ancha para salirnos. El que quiera trabajar y el que no, no, dice, nadie los obliga. Pero nosotros tenemos necesidad, tenemos niños chiquitos, ya somos de aquí y tenemos que trabajar, porque si no, no comemos.
Y les dijo que todo estaba tranquilo y que sigan trabajando. Eso es lo que dijo y que ya tenía respuesta. ¿Cuál? Aquí hay mucha gente que está esperando respuesta. Y a mí eso me llena de tristeza en el corazón por cada uno de nosotros.
For laborers, especially those with children, it's hard to understand how they could get by on the wages they're paid here. Which is why workers like Anna joined the strike. She's been picking in the fields since she was 12 years old. She works at a nearby raspberry ranch, normally 6 days a week, but sometimes it's every day. And even then, she says, it's not enough for her and her family. I don't know how much a carton of eggs cost here or milk cost here, so I'm curious how that money spends. How do you make ends meet? How does that affect your budget?
A veces no comemos, mis hijos no comen cereal, claro. No toman leche, no comemos queso, no jamón. Solamente compramos huevos, sopa, arroz, frijol, aceite la más barata que hay, un paquete de pañal, lo más barato y lo que más ocupamos. Pero no leche, no queso, no pescado, no carne. Está muy caro la carne de res, no comemos eso nosotros.
I don't see a refrigerator, so are you able to refrigerate food?
No tenemos refri. No tenemos refri, por eso no compramos eso. Si tuviéramos refri, vamos a pagar más de la luz y no va a alcanzar para pagar de la luz ni del agua. No nos alcanza el dinero.
Most of the people who live in Anna's neighborhood are also farm workers in the surrounding fields, working long hours where they pick produce mostly destined for the U.S.
¿Se imagina? Salimos cuando el sol no sale todavía y regresamos cuando el sol ya se ocultó. Ya no alcanzamos a ver a los hijos, ya no los llevamos a pasear, que a los hijos hay que dedicarle más tiempo, pero no nos queda de otro más que trabajar, y si no trabajamos no comemos.
Anna told us she isn't sure how much longer her family can go without her paycheck. But she's even more afraid of going back to the fields and to the same low wages.
Prácticamente ya es tarde, pero para una lucha social, una lucha de jornaleros, jamás es tarde. Este es el principio de una lucha por tantas injusticias existentes en nuestro país.
All that tension along the road is about what's happening right now in this building where protest leaders are meeting with authorities. With the strike entering its second week, workers finally got the meeting they had been asking for with state officials, but even more importantly with a representative of the farm owners, their bosses. After hours of negotiating, they reached agreements on a few points, but everything stopped at one issue.
Yo le estoy proponiendo el 6% aplicable precisamente a su salario que actualmente recibe usted.
¿Cuánto se le llama eso?
Es un tanto difícil poderle establecer el monto en cantidades porque cada empresa paga diferente.
On the average day's salary, 6% would be less than 50 cents.
Lo que queremos es un salario justo y nosotros consideramos, sin propasarnos, que es justo que ganen 300 pesos.
Lo que hemos entendido aquí es precisamente que estamos dialogando y buscando una mejor solución para ambas partes, ¿no?
Yo, lo personal, para mí es una burla esto. ¿A qué estamos jugando? ¿Desgastar los trabajadores más de lo que están? ¿O cansarlos más de lo que están cansados? ¿O que griten aquellos que ya se murieron desde su tumba? Señores, vayamos con algo concreto.
Most of the workers in San Quintín are actually paid more than Mexico's minimum wage. But that's not difficult to do because the minimum wage here is only about $4.50 a day. By this point, workers have been striking for more than a week, and it had become a question of who would blink first, them or their bosses, and of how long the workers could go without getting paid. Nights followed and the negotiations are still continuing up the road, but workers have amassed here, and there are hundreds of them standing with their backs to the police who are just across the road. And they say that they're going to stay here until they find out what's happening with the negotiations. As talks dragged on into the night and the next few days, workers lowered their demand from 300 to 200 pesos. But even that, they would find out, would be too much for growers. All right, sources just told us that the talks are about to stop. These talks have been going on for days, and the growers have offered a final offer of only 15% more, which really breaks out to, cents on the dollar. As we arrived, the representative for the region's growers had just walked out of the talks.
Sí, la parte que propusimos fue una parte ya decisiva, del 15% precisamente sobre el salario que está aplicando, también a su vez contemplando el salario de staff. Y es una parte ya decisiva que ya está bien definida.
Hey, why not take the workers' offer at 200 pesos a day?
Esa parte ya está queda bien definida, es un supuesto muy diferente que cada empresa tiene establecido un salario. Esa postura es de todos los...
¿Por qué no piensan en nosotros? Si nuestras manos es el que da a ellos que ellos coman. Si nuestras manos es el que los alimenta a ellos. Si no estuviéramos nosotros, ellos no tuvieran dinero, ellos no tuvieran la riqueza que tienen. Pero aún ellos siguen de necio y no quieren ver la realidad de nosotros los jornaleros que estamos sobreviviendo, no estamos viviendo una vida bien.
It's 5:30 a.m. Workers are lining up to board buses that will take them to the fields for the day. After negotiations broke down, farm worker leaders moved on to talks with the federal government to try and persuade them to help. And meanwhile, pickers returned to work, unable to go any longer without a paycheck, even if it wasn't as much as they'd hoped for. With the strike over, we wanted to see what a day was like for workers in San Quintín. So we went to visit the fields of one of the largest growers in the valley, Berry Mix. Better known to U.S. consumers by their distributor, Driscoll's. The workers' hands are basically the starting line of the track that leads produce to its ultimate destination, the consumer. In the States, everything is so automated. You go into a grocery store and everything is just laid out with dozens of these boxes and all the food ready for you. You kind of forget that every single berry is picked by human hands, by a person, and then is sorted and then put in the box. And every box is opened up and every berry is looked at for quality control. And I mean, it's really a human-intensive process. I think we've forgotten that today's grocery stores. Because it's peak season right now, workers aren't being paid a day rate, but by the box. So their earnings depend on what they're able to pick, but that depends on how much fruit there actually is. Berry Mix gave us permission to film on their ranches, but said we couldn't talk to anyone on camera. But as we walked through the fields, pickers told us how precarious a day can be for them when they have to rely on there being enough good berries to pick.
14 la caja, pero apenas empezaron a pagar 14. Antes pagaban a 10 pesos. Había la caja, pero de ahorita así como está, no tiene nada y no sacamos nada.
Even with the small raise after the strike, it didn't seem like it was enough to help workers like they had hoped.
For everybody who thinks that farm work is unskilled labor, they're wrong. I would challenge them to go to the fields for an hour and let's see if they can pick some strawberries. But the fact remains that these workers are some of the most marginal workers within Mexico.
Pues la parte más difícil, pues el trabajo es cansado también y sobre todo estar agachado casi todo el día, pues como que también al día siguiente amaneces adolorido de la espalda, te cansas.
Miguel is a strawberry picker for Berry Mix. Like the majority of farm workers here, he comes from Oaxaca, one of Mexico's poorest states. How was your day at work today? What did you do?
Pues donde nos tocó, pues no tenía fruta, pues.
Most of his money goes toward renting this small room and paying for food. And the rest is sent back home to his wife and family in Oaxaca.
Allá necesitan dinero, pero yo creo que aquí gasto más que allá. De lo que envío allá, pues es menos y aquí es lo que gasto más, creo.
Does that make it seem like it's not worth it?
Con mi pueblo, allá no hay nada, pues, ningún trabajo y aquí para mí ya está no muy mejor que digamos, pero ahí más o menos.
What's the hardest part about living here?
Pues la parte más difícil es estar uno solo aquí, pues, uno solo y sin la familia, pues como que a veces pues da tristeza, ¿no? Porque tienes a tu familia allá y tú acá y pues también me motiva mi familia para estar aquí y trabajar.
How long do you plan on doing this?
Pues tengo la esperanza de que toda nuestra gente pues ganen, de que pues le suban un poco más al salario, pues es la única esperanza que yo tengo de poder regresar allá. No me voy a regresar así con las manos, así como me vine, pues no creo.
Berry Mix has said that workers have the opportunity to make between $5 and $9 an hour with the salary rise after the strike, though the workers we met denied that.
One misleading way to really say that workers make a lot of money is to measure wages at the peak of the season and what would a fast picker make. So you would have really 3 very strong months in which you can make a lot of money. However, remember that you don't need to eat only 3 months out of the year. The wages that are now set between 140, 180, well, it doesn't go a long way.
Miguel's words were echoed by other workers, like this raspberry picker who works for Berry Mix. She asked us to keep her identity anonymous because she's afraid of the repercussions for speaking out. For her, it's not just the pay alone, but the long hours and feeling pressured to work harder and faster. What time do you come home?
¿A qué horas llego? Llego, hay veces las 4, hay veces las 5 y hay veces hasta las 6, 7 de la noche. Andamos pero a la carrera. Ahora sí que ahí no tenemos ni tiempo de que te pares un ratito, unos 5 minutos y descanses, no. Porque ahí luego los mayordomos se enojan y ya luego nos dicen, no, apúrense, apúrense. Nos apuran pues mucho. nos chingamos trabajando en el surco para que nos vengan a pagar una miseria. Mire las espinas, no me está preguntando. Tengo espinas, mire, espinas, mire. Todo aquí las espinas. No le voy a engañar, mire, mire.
It's like
Mire,
sandpaper.
Mire, aquí tengo una, no me la puedo sacar. Y aquí tengo la otra, mire, aquí.
Claro.
No me la puedo sacar, porque no me la veo, pues no me la miro. Porque pues es una fruta, ¿cómo les diré? Muy delicada. Esa fruta es muy delicada. Ahora sí que la cuidamos, pues, porque ese es el pan nuestro de cada día, ¿verdad? Y si nosotros no la cuidamos, ¿quién la va a cuidar? Más que nosotros. Y para que nos paguen una miseria.
We wanted to talk to Barry Mex to find out what it would take for them to come up to the rates that workers are asking for, but they said no to our interview request. So we decided to head north to see if we could get an answer from the people that buy from Barry Mex, their distributor. Barry Mex and Driscoll's Berries are two independent companies, but they're owned by the same family. And in fact, Barry Mex's only customer is Driscoll's. So we've come to Watsonville, California to see if we can talk to someone at Driscoll's about what's happening with the workers down in San Quintin. For weeks, we'd asked them to speak to us about the situation in San Quintin. We wanted to ask Driscoll's what they would say to the pickers in Baja California that claim that they can't make ends meet with what they're being paid right now, and what the company could do to help raise their wages. But Driscoll says they won't talk to us on camera about this.
All the investment, all the economic model really is for the attraction of transnational capital, but how about the people who live there? What's interesting, though, the uprising of San Quintin points to a big failure of this economic model, and it is the fact that you can work very hard and you will remain poor.
Barry Mex isn't the only company in San Quintin, of course. We wanted to see what it would take for other growers in the valley to raise wages here. So we went to Los Pinos Ranch, one of Mexico's largest exporters of tomatoes to the U.S., where we were given a tour by the CEO, Fernando Rodriguez, and shown what a day is like for workers here. The idea here seemed to be pick as much as you can and as fast as you can. Is there room in the profits of the company to pay the workers more than they get now?
As a base, no. We did an increase about 15% after the strike, but the margins are not so good. So increasing that amount, it can get us out of business.
Rodriguez told us the cost of production and transportation make it too difficult to increase workers' pay because of what his produce sells for up the chain.
The margin of what I know is the margin on the supermarket it's more than ours and more than the distributor and more than everyone.
Why does our food system act the way it does? It's really about profits, and it's really about these margins. And it's really about who gets what at the end of the day.
Moving up the produce supply chain, everything stops here at the retailer, and the price they pay for a product is what trickles down to workers in the fields.
The tendency of the industry is for the retailer to squeeze the supplier. So who does the supplier squeeze? The supplier squeezes the workers. And since the workers are the weakest in the value chain, they're the ones who end up suffering the most when all this squeezing is said and done. This is a tremendously wealthy food system, $6 trillion a year. It's just very poorly distributed.
What do you think is at the heart of the strike? Why do you think they're striking?
I don't really know. I mean, it's hard to tell because there is no interest on what the companies think about it.
It seems to us, having spent some time with workers, what's driving this is they're having trouble making ends meet. That everything's going up around them except for their pay is what they feel like. Does that seem true to you? Because they tell us they're having trouble making ends meet.
Well, I mean, in Mexico we are suffering inflation. Mexico, it's getting expensive, yes. Yes, and not just Baja California, it's all Mexico. I mean, that's impact for our pocket.
So you see how that impacts the workers.
Mm-hmm.
So do you see how it would be hard to get by on their salary?
Yeah.
A month after the strike ended, farm workers took to the street once more. After leaders of the movement were able to convince the federal government to sit down to negotiations with them. They try to seal an agreement to bring day wages up to 200 pesos.
Trataremos de ayudar a nuestros hermanos y queremos que este tema no se acabe en esta instancia y en esta plática. Es un deber de todos, tanto de legisladores, gobierno estatal, gobierno federal y de todos los, diría, mexicanos, ayudar a nuestros hermanos que se encuentran en esta situación tan desagradable. Por su atención, mil gracias y les agradezco mucho. Es un tema que estará resuelto en los próximos 15 días. Es la solicitud.
A month and a half later, the government announced that they had gotten growers to agree to pay a bit more, but not the 200 pesos the workers had been fighting for. Worn down, and with their options exhausted too, they had no other choice but to accept the offer.
The beauty for the retailer of growing in San Quintín, Mexico, is one, these people are not seen and their strike is not heard. I don't think the retailers have to try very hard to obfuscate the source of the food that we eat. That's the nature of this system. When you pick up an apple, or you don't look at you don't see the labor in that apple, but it's embodied in that apple. These are like you walk down the grocery aisle, think about all this phantom labor embodied in all those products. We don't see it.
For the big cup that you wear of raspberries that you get paid, how much do you get paid for the cup?
9 pesos.
9 pesos. In the United States, those same raspberries will sell for 450 pesos.
No, nos están fregando ahora sí.
Pues ni con una caja nos pagan todo el día, ni con una caja caja nos pagan. Y pues creo que no es justo, creo, no.
How does that make you feel?
Pues la verdad no tengo palabra. Pues sí, siento que sí, están abusando de la gente que trabaja también.
¿Cómo es posible que ellos, vendan su producto elevado ahora sí de dinero y a nosotros nos estén pagando una miseria? Mientras que ellos están ahora sí, enriqueciendo y ellos van para arriba y nosotros para abajo.